Okay. Okay, great. So we're joined by Charles, who's a doctoral candidate at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and he works to formalize the policies that constitute the core proposals for a European social ecological transformation and to outline how European institutions would need to change to implement these policies. So Charles, we're really excited to have you here today and hear about your great work. I'm just going to pin you on the screen. Oh wait, no, I'm not going to do that because I want everyone to see you sharing content and it switched on my screen. And I'll hand it over to you to hear more about your great work.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you all for devoting your lunch hour to discussing this policy. There we go. Who is going to do the work of transforming our societies for the 21st century? That's the question that I would like us all to discuss today. I'm going to talk about the job guarantee and the implications it could have both for working time across the economy and, as Grace was saying, for social ecological transformation more broadly. Specifically, I want us to ask how a job guarantee could contribute to bringing our economies in line with planetary boundaries. Can it constitute a transformative demand for social movements, parties, and trade unions? And if enacted, could it become a vehicle for other reforms, including a working time reduction? Before we get to that, you might ask why I started with the question of work in social ecological transformation. Well, as you all know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. This is a social revolution. A revolution in how we eat, a revolution in how we heat our homes, a revolution in how we move around the world, a revolution in how we care for one another. And before getting to our proposal for a job guarantee, I wanted to check in with our current approach to achieving this revolution. So the economist Daniel Gabor describes the existing public policy paradigm as the European de-risking state. It means that rather than provide the needed investment itself, governments across Europe make those investments in schools, roads, hospitals, nature restoration, attractive to the private sector. We know that to some degree this is working. The share of renewables-based energy systems contributing to Europe's electricity grid, for example, is rising year after year. And that's good news, right? The state has made investments in renewables attractive, and private companies are investing. That's what private companies do. They produce what's profitable. They can't produce commodities that aren't profitable, or they can't remain competitive. We hear all the time that renewables are going to outcompete fossil fuels in an energy transition. But we know that that just isn't the case. In his most recent book, the political economist Brett Christophers points out very simply that we live in an economy in which investment is determined by profitability, not price. So the idea that fossil fuels are going to get outcompeted while they remain profitable is simply a fantasy. On the left here, you have global primary direct energy consumption in terawatt hours between 1800 and 2024. And at the very top, you have the additions that have been achieved in the last years in renewable energy. And then in gray, blue, and purple, you have fossil fuels. And I just wanted to start here because we should remember that from a climate perspective, those proportions of gray, blue, and purple energy are what matters. Carbon emissions don't care about national borders. So it's important that Europe is increasing its investments in renewable energy. But I live in Spain, where Repsol reported 1.7 billion in profits last year. And as long as that's the case, fossil fuels will remain a key sector. And we currently have no plan for phasing out the bulk of our energy system, which from an ecological transition perspective is all that really matters. So how could we achieve that? Well, a job guarantee isn't a panacea. It isn't a magic wand that will miraculously phase out the fossil fuel sector for us. But because it's funded by the government, as we'll discuss, it can go where the private sector can't and do necessary work that isn't profitable. Particularly as we position retraining as a central tenet of the programs, workers, again, in these fossil fuel sectors, to stick with our examples, can use their skills to build out the energy systems of the future, for example. I live in Catalonia, like everywhere else. We need to retrofit every building to make them more energy efficient. Grace was laughing about the sun that we enjoy here, but try living here in January, and it's honestly shocking. It's the worst insulation of anywhere I've ever experienced. Is the private sector going to do this necessary work of building retrofits? No, it's not profitable. In Spain, we have a high-speed rail network that opinion writers in The Guardian love to wax lyrical about. It's great if you need to get from Barcelona to Madrid and back again in the same day, but what about the people who don't live in Barcelona or Madrid? What about rural communities? We have efficient public transport in almost no rural areas of Europe because it isn't profitable. And that's why we need the job guarantee to build out the universal public services that we all deserve. So the job guarantee is a central tenet of providing the labor required for the industrial policy of the 21st century, the ecological transformation, the social revolution we know is required. Ooh. Okay, amazing. The job guarantee. Concretely, we're talking about a federally funded program to end involuntary unemployment by providing meaningful work paid at a living wage to all those who seek it. It's voluntary, and enrollment is never a condition for receiving other benefits. As I've said, retraining for those workers most affected by a social ecological transition makes the job guarantee central to ensuring those transition plans are just. The job guarantee provides a key for revitalizing communities that have been left behind by deindustrialization in rural areas of Europe and beyond. It crucially requires institution building at the national, regional, and local level to allow workers to develop and expand their skills. As I said, it has to be funded by the government because the private sector won't do this work. It can't do this work because most of the work that really matters isn't profitable. Teaching, nature conservation, combating invasive species, building healthcare systems that are resilient to the possible emergence of a new pandemic, climate adaptation. In the discussion, I'm very happy to talk in far greater detail about possible funding mechanisms, either at the European level or somewhere else if you're more interested. But I didn't want to center that discussion today because I'm a little tired of us playing defense when it comes to finance and letting elites tell us what we can and can't afford. 1.8 trillion for the pandemic emergency purchase program? Yes, absolutely. 5% of GDP for rearmament? Absolutely. Oh, but the actual policies we need to survive the 21st century? Sorry, we're actually becoming very fiscally responsible all of a sudden. So anyone who's listened to a public talk by my supervisor, Jason Hickel, has probably heard him quote John Maynard Keynes, arguing that anything we can actually do, we can afford. And I have to agree that it's past time that we go on offense on economic questions. And again, I'm very happy to spend time here and talk about the implications of the job guarantee, for example, for inflation in the discussion. But at the moment, I would like to tell you about job guarantee schemes that are already in place today, from Rajasthan to Montpellier. So the largest job guarantee in history was enacted in India in 2005. It's the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee, and it ensures that every adult member of a rural household can receive at least 100 days of paid work annually, particularly in public works like infrastructure development, water conservation, and rural road construction. It has also increased women's participation in the economy, providing a formal source of income, autonomy, and recognition for their work. The scale of this project has really demonstrated the viability of a demand-driven, government-run job creation program in the way that Keynes was already thinking about it in the 1920s and 1930s. Similarly, France launched a program in 2017 called Territoire Zéro Chômeur de Longue Durée, And it finances jobs in the solidarity economy, where mayors of towns in the pilot regions have described the positive effects of new incomes on the local economy as a whole. Other municipalities have requested the job guarantee on the basis that it costs less than alternative anti-poverty measures and unemployment benefits. Now, I want to argue that the job guarantee would constitute a non-reformist reform that could open up space for deeper social ecological transformation from the bottom up. The idea comes from André Gortz, whose actual name was Gerhard Hirsch, and he did all his work alongside his longtime spouse, Doreen Kier, but she never gets any of the credit. So I have them both up here because they basically proposed that the labor movement should identify proposals that weren't just good policy in themselves, but that would subvert core capitalist logics and create space for further transformation. The job guarantee is a perfect example of these kinds of non-reformist or revolutionary reforms. And to understand why, we need to go back a little bit further and look at the work of the Polish economist Michał Kalecki. So in 1943, Kalecki wrote a beautiful essay that I really recommend you all read called The Political Aspects of Full Employment. And he basically argued that the recovery from the Great Depression of 1929 and the New Deal in the United States had shown that governments could use public spending to achieve full employment, but that this had major consequences for the power of the capitalist class in society. Suddenly, getting fired, losing your job was no longer so scary because you could get another job right away. And if workers no longer rely on the private sector for employment, their collective bargaining power increases and they can begin demanding higher wages, better working conditions, more workplace democracy. In this vein, we believe that the job guarantee creates a vehicle for a whole host of other policies, including a working time reduction. Numerous studies have shown that workers working 30 hours a week are just as productive as those working 40, but this is the European Working Time Network, so I don't need to expand on the social and ecological benefits of working time reductions, which span reductions in air pollution to better childcare to reduced stress and anxiety and better mental health. Many of us, however, are stuck today working 40, 45, 50 hours a week, unable to provide the care our children need and deprived of what really matters in life. So enacting a job guarantee at 30 hours per week could cause a working time reduction across the economy. And I want to make this crystal clear. How would that work? Well, let's imagine that the government is paying me a living wage to build solar panels for 30 hours of weekly work. Why would I take a job at Burger King working 40 hours on low pay? So the job guarantee constitutes a revolutionary reform in that it sets a benchmark with which the private sector needs to compete across the economy. And in doing so, it totally changes the power of workers in that economy. In this vein, it can be used to restore the labor movement that has been suffering setback after setback through 40 years of neoliberalism. And this leads me to my last argument, which is that the job guarantee can be a transformative demand for social movements, parties, and unions. So just to recap here, the job guarantee can be used to achieve a minimum wage, working time reductions, and better working conditions, more workplace democracy across the economy by setting this benchmark with which the private sector needs to compete. So you could think of it as kind of a Trojan horse for lots of other social and labor policies that we would like to see implemented. Going back to this point about using the job guarantee as first and foremost a transformative demand before we even think about its implementation. In Tunisia in 2011, there was a very popular slogan, which is "A job is a right, you pack of thieves." And I kind of feel like we should revive that sentiment today. We know that a recent poll in France found that the job guarantee found 79% support. 79% support in France, where how many prime ministers have we run through in the last in the last 6 months? So at a time of heightened political polarization, the point here is that the job guarantee appeals across political and identitarian divides. Those of you who are interested in North American politics, I recommend looking at the work of the Center for Working Class Politics, which has done really good polling on this question. Yeah, check it out. They've done some excellent reports focused specifically on the job guarantee. Our government here in Madrid recently looked at the possibility of implementing a job guarantee in Spain and decided it wasn't necessary. Not necessary at a time when Spain has some of the highest unemployment rates in Europe. Even those who aren't unemployed, particularly the youth, are often underemployed, stuck in jobs that are low wage and precarious, facing new threats from automation to the rise of artificial intelligence. This is why this demand is so powerful. It appeals to everyone, not just who has struggled to find a job, but who's ever been stuck in a job they don't like or wanted to contribute to confronting the greatest challenges of the 21st century. So it's not just about having a job, it's about what kind of job. How many of us actually get to feel that our work contributes to combating the concomitant social and ecological crises we face? At a time when so much necessary work in care, in ecological restoration goes undone, we all deserve to do meaningful work confronting the greatest challenges of our time. And that's what a job guarantee is for. So in 2025, serious discussion of ecological transformation has all but disappeared from public discourse. And we view the job guarantee as a core demand for a left that is struggling to put forward a new vision of the future to counter the dystopian rhetoric currently coming from the far right. By making the case that ecological policy can improve the lives of ordinary people, we can build the collective power to break the political impasse we face and forge a path towards resilience and well-being in the 21st century. With that, I would be remiss if I didn't invite you all to read the full policy brief that was published last week by Research and Degrowth on this subject. So if anyone's interested in getting into some of the nitty-gritty and the details of its implementation, you can scan the QR code there on the right. Before heading into the discussion, I just want to say thank you, Grace, for yeah, just your impeccable work making this event happen. And yeah, I'm really excited for the discussion and for branching out in any directions that seem fruitful to you all. But more than anything, thank you for your stubborn optimism of the will, and please reach out if you have questions or feedback.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles. Also, I just love the quote to end on. I am going to stop sharing your screen, I think, just to boom. Okay, great. And then I will also maybe pin you when we get a question in. But yeah, that was great. And I particularly loved kind of you talking about the role of kind of the model employer for kind of like the federal workforce and kind of what that means in terms of changing dynamics for work time reduction too. I think that's really important, kind of the pressure that puts on private employers, but also the way that builds powers for workers. So would love to take some questions. We've got a great amount of time for a really interesting topic. Anyone want to jump in first? Either feel free to raise your hand on Zoom and I can call on you, or if you're more comfortable typing something into the chat, feel free to do that and I can read it out. Anyone want to go first? Okay, if no one wants to go first, I can maybe kick us off and oh, actually, Lucas. Great, thanks, Lucas.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Charles, for the presentation. It was very interesting, and yeah, I'm interested about this topic. I'm also working on I'm a PhD candidate in Norway, and I'm also working on the future of work in, for safeguarding good lives within safe limits. I have a question about like based also on the cases you mentioned in France and the US, in India, how actually is organized or like the coordination of those activities where people can find a job, or how is that actually organized? Who decides on the kind of activities that are being carried out? And if you had a few things also to say about yeah, the concrete organization.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lucas. I often get this where I feel like in the 21st century, it's kind of hard for us to imagine these like demand-driven government jobs programs. And so an example I like to give to make it a little bit more concrete for people is actually the Swiss National Service, which I had to participate in. And the way it works is that if you're a conscientious objector to military service, you get distributed to an organization or a private company in Switzerland that does social or ecological work. So there's a centralized platform. You apply through the government, but then you are farmed out to these organizations who actually do the work of managing you, of yeah, being responsible for your national service with your salary paid by the Swiss government. So this is essentially a labor subsidy which could be rolled out tomorrow. In Switzerland, this is just for 18 to 30-year-old males. But it's one example of a job guarantee scheme that we could expand to a much wider swath of the population. So I hope that makes it maybe a little bit more concrete for people. This has been done in different places, in different ways at different times. In the US, as you mentioned, there have been critiques historically of what's been called kind of expansion without institution building. That's by a sociologist called Margaret Ware, who was talking about the employment schemes of the 1960s and 70s under Johnson. And she basically made again the point, which I alluded to quite rapidly, that if you're going to expand employment, you need to build out the institutions, not just kind of the Department of Labor that's going to oversee all this, but also kind of at the local level. If we're thinking about a locally administered job guarantee, which I think we should be wherever possible, then we need local structures to oversee this work.
Great. Thank you, Charles. I'll turn to India and then I'll turn to a question in the chat.
Thanks very much, Charles. Super interesting presentation, and yeah, really interested to hear about this, and thank you, Grace, for organizing. I have a question about if there are interested organizations such as the Autonomy Institute or Demos Helsinki, where I am currently. Are there any particular kind of research or advocacy avenues that you think would be most impactful or useful in the yeah, kind of building the argument and the case and the evidence base in favor of a jobs guarantee in Europe?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, India. Lovely to see you. Just so I'm clear, so are you asking for resources, or are we now brainstorming where is it most fruitful to go and advocate for this, or both?
The latter.
The latter. Okay. Well, I've been talking about this with our policy officer in Brussels, who I imagine some of you might know, Emily Tricarico, and she's been talking to many kind of your peers and colleagues who feel that there isn't a lot of appetite for these kinds of ambitious labor and social policies at the European level, which isn't surprising because we have the most right-wing parliament that's ever been elected in Brussels. But I was talking about it with Grace before we got on the call. We just did an event here in Catalonia with representatives from labor unions who were very excited about this demand because they've just been talking more about basic income schemes in the last 10 years. I think this is an idea that at this point has really made its way around. And to be very clear, I'm not an opponent of basic income, but politically I think it's tricky because there's a lot of space for the right to attack these ideas on the basis that people kind of want something for nothing and people are just lazy. And they've struggled much more with these proposals that center the idea that people actually want to contribute to society. And this is, again, backed up by the available evidence, where job guarantee schemes have been implemented alongside other forms of social assistance like unemployment benefits. People tend to prefer the job guarantee. So actually saying everyone has the right to work with dignity, I think is a really powerful demand, even if it doesn't solve everything. But I think that at this time of kind of right-wing backlash, we need to be going back to ordinary people again and making a case that ecological policy has the potential to transform their lives.
Great, super helpful, Charles. And you hit a point that was the question coming up next from the chat, which was about whether UBI was compatible kind of with your proposal and how maybe you expect them to interact. And I think you kind of touched on some of that, but if you'd be willing maybe to expand a bit more, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we really talk about, and maybe we can get into this in more detail, but in our research on the Post-Growth Deals project in Barcelona, we're thinking about a package of social and labor policies, and we see basic income as complementary to the job guarantee. So the idea is to achieve a guaranteed income across the economy without forcing people to enroll in the job guarantee if they don't want to. And this is kind of a threat that we should take seriously, because if we look at the public works programs implemented under Orban in Hungary, it's just that, right? This is designed to force people off welfare and into public works schemes, and that's not the job guarantee proposal as I've currently articulated it to you. So we generally talk about a care income, which would be focused on revalorizing care work for human and more than and human nature in society, which would be available to all those, and the only condition is you're not enrolled in the job guarantee. So if you say I'm a carer outside of waged employment, and I want to continue to care for my family, for whoever, you can just apply for this care income, and you could apply for it if you're an artist, if you don't want to contribute to public works. But again, the wager here is that people will want to take up these programs, because many of us feel bored, alienated in our current jobs, deprived from feeling like we're doing meaningful work.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Charles. Tatiana, did you want to jump in next?
Sorry, to unmute myself. Yeah, thank you, and thank you so much. This was so interesting. I think I have a general question about the retraining element that you said is very central to the proposal. And just in terms of, if you could expand a little bit more on what that entails, and I guess related to the question of what kinds of jobs should be guaranteed. So you were talking, and I was getting lunch at that point, so I may have missed some of what you were saying at the beginning. So apologies if you did address that in the presentation, but about the possibility of the job guarantee essentially helping us also build the universal basic services that we need, and doing that work that the private sector is not going to do because it's not profitable. How does that impact essentially the kinds of skills that we need for those jobs? And then are there any implications? I'm thinking, for example, about the healthcare system, but a lot of others as well, where does that have any implications in terms of the length or the time it might take to have that come into place? As in, I can see a world in which this can be implemented kind of overnight, but there's also this element of how long does it take to actually train, for example, nurses or doctors. Takes several years, and we do need that. But so would that be then a job understood as training and study, but that would be part of the jobs that are guaranteed under this scheme, for example? Or is that kind of a mixed approach there? Does it depend on sectors? Yeah, so a very broad question, but any thoughts that you have on that? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tatiana. It can allow me to point out how what I've put forward today is more ambitious than the way job guarantees are often conceptualized. So, like, the preeminent scholar in this field is Pavlina Cherneva, and I really, for those of you who are interested, I recommend her book, The Case for the Job Guarantee. And these are kind of proposals that stem from this like long Keynesian tradition. And in this conception, a job guarantee is seen more as a sponge for the involuntary unemployed. So you lose your job, you enroll in the job guarantee. Rather than giving you new skills, it prevents you from your current skills eroding, and then you're re-employed into the private sector doing the kind of high-skilled labor that you were alluding to, Tatiana. And our conception of the job guarantee, as I was saying, is more ambitious in that we envisaged not paying every participant at minimum wage, but a tiered income system which would reward reskilling and basically compete with the private sector for high skilled workers. What this looks from an implementation perspective will look different based on context. I've laid it out at a very high level of abstraction, and this then needs to be adapted to whatever location you're going to implement it. In Spain, for example, there are very high like entrance tests for public sector jobs. So this is kind of the work of implementation that needs to be worked out. Can you enroll in a form of job guarantee that doesn't require these and retrain alongside it? Thereby, the program would be used to kind of encourage retraining. This is kind of the nitty-gritty, the details that need to be worked out when this is implemented in a context-specific manner.
Great. Thank you so much. Margareta, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for this interesting speech. I have a question or maybe two, to the fact that in general, the employers and their confederations are not interested in full employment. So this is a big barrier against this wonderful proposal, because the right-wing parties, as cooperators with the employers, in no case will do something for such a job guarantee. So question, and in contrary, you argued that for the trade unions it is in general a very good idea, because it increases the power of trade unions. So the question is how we can build arguments that are really bringing solutions for the financial crisis of the states. We have recently, Germany is in a big finance crisis, all the other countries in Europe already longer. And so, I don't know, did you make such an calculation, for example, how big are the costs of the long-term unemployment in relation to the costs of the paying of this job guarantee? For example, this would be one instrument maybe in the argumentation.
Thanks, Margareta. So I'm hearing a question about political feasibility and a question about funding and costs. And on the political feasibility, Koletsky wouldn't have said it any differently. You're going to face pushback from the bosses. And yeah, just to reiterate, the goal here is not to win over the chambers of commerce of the world, right? So maybe to stick with our European example, we're saying, oh, we can't talk about this in today's European Parliament because we have an overrepresentation of corporate interests, and that's perfectly true. But 50% of European voters didn't even vote for this Parliament because they didn't see themselves represented. They didn't see a hopeful vision of the future there, and those are the people that I'm much more interested in talking to than kind of trying to win over the People's Party to the job guarantee. So I feel that to actually build momentum for these kinds of transformative demands, we need to go back to ordinary people with ideas that will resonate to them as they're living through a cost of living crisis, right? It's not enough to say, oh, we want social-ecological transformation. Okay, great. Like what's social-ecological transformation? How is it going to help me pay my bills? I think that a job guarantee here is key for a left that actually wants to reconnect with the people it claims to care about. And I'll share on the chat a blog by Jason Hickel, who kind of outlines this and the power of good demands. And I think we're kind of behind in this debate. And then second, on the question of costs. So there was a remarkable study done here in Spain that found that an unemployed worker costs the state just shy like 19,900 euros annually, which is like remarkably close to the median salary in Spain. And then there was a further pilot that was run in Marienthal, Austria, and it found that actually once you take into account the savings in unemployment and unemployment benefits, etc., implementing a job guarantee over the long term was actually cost effective. And so again, like there's a burgeoning literature and increasing evidence here that shows that yes, the job guarantee will require increased public spending to roll out, but in the long term, it pays for itself. If we care about those arguments, which I would kind of argue, like, yeah, let's talk about the evidence and let's discuss that. But if we can actually do this, then we can afford it. Yeah, I hope that's a start to an answer. I'm happy to share some of this. Some of this evidence. It is all it is all in the brief, not to.
Okay, only I
School.
did not could not follow you completely. How much is the cost of the unemployment in Spain, for example, is about 19,000 euro per annum,
Mhm.
but the cost for a job guarantee workplace, how much is that?
We don't have figures in Spain. I've heard that the Spanish government have done research into this. That's not released. But we don't have empirical evidence. We don't have empirical evidence here in Spain. That's why I brought up Austria, where there was an empirical study on the fiscal costs, and they basically found that over the long term, this is fiscally neutral, and that's before you take into account the increased the contributions of a job guarantee schemes to local economies, which are very significant. And this is what we see in the French example that I brought up. You really see these programs as a way of revitalizing local economies that are struggling from deindustrialization.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret, for that question, and Charles, that great response. Mario, right before I head to you, I'm going to just go to the chat really quickly. So we had someone ask what actors / organizations in society are likely to support the idea of a social ecological job guarantee, and could it at the same time mobilize it for politically, I think, which is somewhat related to kind of Margareta's question, but who are maybe these actors that can be mobilized?
Well, from an organizational perspective, we've talked about kind of left-wing parties, trade unions, but I think the beauty of this demand is that it appeals to anyone struggling in a cost of living crisis. So that's like the majority of the population, and anyone who is either unemployed themselves, has struggled to find a job, anyone who's hated their job, right? Like how many people do we actually know who are really fulfilled by their work? Like I think this is something we need to be talking about more, given the centrality that work plays in our social imaginaries. Let's talk about how many of us feel stymied and frustrated to be working in corporate jobs that have no meaning for us.
No, absolutely, Charles. I think, yeah, it's a wide breadth of potential. Mario.
So maybe that's a bit trite. Yeah, that's a bit trite, but everyone. This is a
no. I think that like a true, yeah, no, it makes sense. You're campaigning for this, and there really is so much. There's a lot to love. Mario.
Yeah, and I wanted to start with that. I am very much amazed by these kind of proposals, and I believe myself that they create this sense of really caring for ourselves that many young people nowadays have very clear. We don't want bullshit jobs. We want a better life. But yeah, I was talking about this yesterday. I was also organizing these job guarantee events in Spain with Research and the Growth. But yesterday with a friend, I was just thinking about some narratives that maybe we should try to answer. So my question would be, how would you address people that are very skeptical of the capacity of the state to use efficiently resources and so on? And instead would maybe prefer that you try with subsidies or fiscal policy or other kind of tools, even monetary policy, to render activities that are profitable unprofitable, like the fossil fuel industry. Why don't we try to make them unprofitable? And why don't we try to make other activities profitable? But, like maybe they prefer this kind of decentralized approach where you just create the right incentives so that the private sector does this, or this. So I was just wondering, what kind of arguments do we have to say maybe this is better to the job guarantee?
Yeah, I'd love to make this more of a discussion, and to hear also, Mario, like from you, what your thoughts on this are, because like you understand the Spanish context better than I do, and this needs to be adapted to a particular conjuncture, right? Like I'm Swiss and US American. In Switzerland, we have some of the highest trust in institutions of like anywhere in the world. So if the Swiss government said we're going to roll out a job guarantee, people would probably think, oh, we can do this. You do that in the US, and you run into the problems that you're confronting, which is extreme skepticism of kind of government's ability to do this stuff. So I think it's context specific. But yeah, I would love to hear some of like your ideas.
I can give you some
collective view,
input.
yeah.
Like most of my progressive mind friends, all the leftist people I know and so on, are very much skeptical about giving the state too much power over this. And they would favor any job guarantee scheme as long as it is decentralized in mind. No? Like what you said before, it's very interesting to me. Like they could pay the salary of people, but let them be employed by organizations that do volunteer job, care work, or environment restoration, all of these things that are left behind of the market. I think that would be for sure supported. But also, I think that some of us, myself included, find difficult to make these proposals appeal to somehow centrist people like the Socialist Party people here in Spain and so on, that they would rather use fiscal policy. They are all in for fiscal policy. They make the rich pay, make fossil fuels pay, and put subsidies to all of these things that we really need, or something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I want to hear from other people, but I think, yeah, I agree with you. And I think that just to stress, like the long-term goal is not to have the entire economy employed by the state. And that's why we kind of, in the policy brief that I was mentioning, we lay out a two-stage implementation of this proposal. And in the first stage, it's exactly what you're describing, where you basically use it as subsidized state labor, right? But in the second phase, you're creating, again, this is where this non-reformist reform logic comes in. You're creating space for new governance structures. So we bring up like public common partnerships as a potential outcome that could be encouraged by the implementation of a job guarantee. And where it's locally administered, which it should be wherever possible, you could have new forms of community inputs and workplace democracy like public common partnerships, which could evolve out of the implementation of a job guarantee. So over the long term, we're not trying to create like a big bureaucratized state that employs everyone. This is a dynamic policy that should evolve over time.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario and Charles. Do we have any other questions? This has been a really great, engaging kind of discussion. India.
Yeah, I have a bit of a question around, and this may be covered in the policy brief, but how trade unions then interact with a jobs guarantee, and are workers under the jobs guarantee unionized, and kind of where does the accountability lie for standard job quality if you have a 4-day week or not? I suppose because an amount of it you assume comes in the design of the jobs guarantee, say 32-hour week is the norm, hopefully. But if, salary negotiations or other working conditions, how democratic is the process, and where does it lie? If it's been thought in that much detail.
Thanks, India. We don't talk about this enough in the policy brief, so I won't bring it up again. No, we chatted about this quite a bit with unions in Catalonia on Friday at this event I was talking about. And as we all know, the big unions today have basically restricted their demands to labor, higher wages, better working conditions. And in doing so, I feel like we've lost some of the logic that was much more present in the 20th century of the potential for big political demands to improve the everyday life of union members. And I mean, Barcelona is like kind of the classic example of this, of a place that really showed the world what radical syndicalism could achieve when workers feel actually empowered. So I think that's the logic here of using the job guarantee as a demand that can really increase kind of class consciousness through its dissemination in unions, and recover this slightly lost tradition of radical political unionism. In terms of what that looks like, well, again, context is everything, but this is a policy that's rolled out in addition to what's already here. So, in most places we have public sector unions that then would feed into these proposals. So none of that goes away, but this just needs to be taken into account when we're thinking about how wages are set for the job guarantee program, what section of your public workforce is unionized, what section it isn't, how would a proposal like this feed into existing structures. This all is going to vary place by place, right?
Great. Thank you, India and Charles. Daniel.
Hello. Thank you for this meeting. It's very interesting, and it's not exactly a question. It's maybe one reflection, because we are working in our union, and through the company negotiations or agreements in the European West Councils, a lot this item of the reduced work time in enterprise, for example, but they refuse because economic reasons. We are talking about this, of course, but my reflection is how we can maintain job stability that we are referring, and increasingly in this increasingly digitalized and rapidly changing world, and at the same time reduce work time. It seems difficult. Of course, like a union or like a workers representative, our first goal is keep the jobs and stability, but it's difficult. I don't know if you can talk about something like this, or you are some examples about. Sorry for my English, first of all.
No, Daniel, your English is perfect. Thank you for that. It's also wonderful to have actual labor representatives who know much more about this than I do concretely. So yeah, in terms of, I completely agree. The goal should be job security and job stability. And we believe that this policy really feeds into that, because whether we like it or not, we are facing a century of instability where we're going to get new threats to jobs, from everything from artificial intelligence to kind of economic warfare from the United States, right? And the beauty of the job guarantee from a macroeconomic perspective is that it forms a powerful automatic fiscal stabilizer, and that in times of economic crisis, more workers would enroll in the program, automatically increasing public spending. And in economic booms, more workers would potentially filter out into other jobs in the private sector. So in this sense, it's a powerful countervalence to ongoing economic insecurity, and in doing so should provide more secure employment in the here and now. That is obviously the overall objective. So yeah, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Margareta, do you want to jump back in?
Mhm. Yes, I would ask you, Charles, could you maybe tell a little bit more detailed about this project with the job guarantee in India? Because this seems to be a very big one, many people, and how was this installed and implemented and paid, and could you say, and the actors who was initiator and so on?
Thanks, Margarita. I'm not an expert on the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee. I will send a nice article in the chat for people who want more details. This is a specifically rural employment guarantee, and it was designed to tackle poverty alleviation above all else. These are some of the Indian communities that faced extreme extreme levels of absolute poverty. And it's famous particularly, as I was mentioning, because it was particularly empowering for female heads of households. So more than 50% of participants in the program are women, and this has really contributed to combating women's economic exclusion in rural Indian economies. But I don't want to overstep my expertise. There's a lot of interesting literature, and the article I sent should send you kind of down some rabbit holes for people who really want to sink their teeth into it. It's exciting. We're talking about millions of participants in this job guarantee every year. So it's the largest ever implemented.
Great, thank you, Charles. Yeah, no, when we first started talking about your presentation and you referred to that, I previously didn't know, and I was like, wow, this is really incredible, and that it's still going on 20 years later, I think really says so much, and kind of the employment outcomes as well, and what that means for rural infrastructure, etc. Great. I think we have time for about one more question. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Charles while we have him here? Tatiana with the final question.
Yeah, I have a very kind of practical one, which is because I'm intrigued by this idea, and I think it sounds great, like the idea that there would be a job guarantee scheme where then people can be distributed, including to existing organizations already in the private sector. I'm just wondering if the examples that you cited, that's how they worked, or if you can tell, say a little bit more about how that works in practice, because I'm wondering if that creates any, I'm thinking of things like unionization as well and things like that. Like, does that create any differences between categories of worker within one organization, for example, and like how does that play out in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Tatjana. I don't have a perfect example for this because I think this will be trial and error. Like in the Swiss example that I brought up, there it does kind of create this slight issue around unionization and how you fit within an organization, because these participants, in this case, it's like the Swiss National Civil Service, are slightly outside of negotiations around wages and these kinds of these kinds of topics. So I think this just needs to be thought through. We came up with this idea of employment via kind of the state paying your salary, because in most places the government just doesn't have the capacity to employ everyone who's involuntarily unemployed in the economy, right? So it was kind of thinking about, so how do we do this here and now and give people work that is meaningful and isn't just like trash collection or something like that. But I think this is like, this is the exciting frontier of future research. We need some empirics on how to roll this out, and then we need to think through on an institutional basis exactly what does this look like, right?
No, definitely. Thank you.
Right. And I'm just reading one comment in the chat about how the proposal can pay for itself, which is great. So just for folks who want to dig in more, and then the importance of kind of creating the power shift for wealthy individuals and the working class, etc. So really great point there by Mario. Thank you so much. Okay. Any other last minute burning questions? I'm really impressed. I feel like, Charles, you presented for about not even 20 minutes and we have just been in discussion since then. So really, really robust conversation. And I think also from kind of a work time reduction angle, so many of the pilots that have been implemented are in the public sector. There's so many calls for the public sector themselves to be implementing work time reduction, because that is such an important frontier for work time reduction, both in terms of what that means for labor market outcomes and employment, but also what that means in terms of kind of actually benefiting from some of the ecological benefits of work time reduction, reduced consumption, etc. So really excited to kind of see it paired into the jobs guarantee. I think, the jobs guarantee can stand up on its own, but the fact that you have really centered work time reduction in that is really crucial. So it's been really great to hear more about that, and also for everyone else to be here with such great questions. So thank you so much. Just for everyone's awareness, the European Work Time Network, we host a webinar every month. And our next webinar is November 26th at 1 p.m. Brussels time with Surya Nag, who will be discussing what work time reduction could mean for the global South. So I think that'll be a really great conversation, and kind of move away from kind of sometimes the just pan-European conversations we typically have. I'm also dropping the link to join the network in the chat, as well as the link to join the webinar for next month. It would be really great to see you all there. And as always, if anyone has any questions or wants to learn more about the network, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find my email. I was like, I was going to drop it in the chat, but I will do that right now. And it's been great to see everyone, and you've got 1 minute left. So work time reduction in the sense that you get 1 minute back from this meeting. Great. Thank you all so much. It was great to be here with you.
Thanks everyone for such a stimulating discussion. It's really nice. Yeah.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Grace. Everyone.